When those two both wanted to do it, suddenly you read the script, and it had a magic to it. For sure. Remember when one crime movie quietly became the gold standard for the cops, the criminals, and every action director who came after? Released by Warner Brothers in 1995, Heat follows a master thief and a detective who can't stop chasing him across Los Angeles. Robert De Niro plays Neil McCauley, the disciplined career robber. And Al Pacino is Vincent Hanna, a burned-out cop on his trail. Val Kilmer as Macaulay's loyal right hand, Chris Shiherlis. Jon Voight as the fence Nate, plus Tom Sizemore, Ashley Judd, and Natalie Portman, and you've got obsession, loyalty, and a whole lot of trouble colliding on the streets of LA. Today, we're counting down 15 weird facts about Heat. Stick around for number 1 to find out how the most unforgettable death in the whole movie actually happened in real life on a Chicago street decades before cameras ever rolled. But before we get into it, like, subscribe, and hype up this video. It helps YouTube show it to more movie fans who still quote the diner scene. All right, don't get attached to anything you can't walk away from in 30 seconds flat. Number 15. The criminals in Heat actually existed. The shootouts, the movie stars, that 3-hour runtime, that's Hollywood. But the men underneath them were pulled straight out of real Chicago detective case files. Michael Mann built Heat on the actual investigations of Chuck Adamson, a Chicago cop who spent years buried in the city's professional crime world. Adamson became the template for Vincent Hanna, the detective that Pacino plays like a man running on cigarettes and about 3 hours of sleep. The bigger surprise is De Niro's master thief. There was a real Neil McCauley, and Mann didn't even change the name. The real one was a hyper-disciplined professional who'd done roughly 25 years in and out of prison, including a stretch at Alcatraz. Adamson described a guy who was never reckless, never flashy, never emotional. He treated robbery like a trade that he had mastered, which is exactly what makes the screen version so quietly terrifying. Even Waingro came off the same pages. The real one informed on a Chicago crew, and the betrayal caught up with him the way betrayal usually does. According to Mann's commentary, the man was tracked down and turned up dead across the Mexican border, nailed to a shack, and nobody was ever sure who did it. Mann gets credit for one of the most meticulous crime films ever made, and the truth is the parts that chill you the most are the parts he didn't have to make up. Number 14. Only one coffee between Pacino and De Niro. For decades, the dream was simply to watch Robert De Niro and Al Pacino act in the same room. Heat finally delivered it, and the two of them made sure the moment would only ever exist once. They refused to rehearse it. The instinct came from De Niro, who figured the scene would only work if it stayed genuinely unfamiliar. Mann and Pacino were on board instantly. The three of them talked the scene into the ground, the characters, the motives, a read or two off the page, and then they stopped deliberately short of ever performing it. Most of what ended up on screen came from the 11th take. You can see the not knowing in it. McCauley shifts his weight, and Hanna adjusts to match him. Both men reading the table live, landing on pauses and small reactions that no rehearsal could manufacture. If you hand that approach to almost any other pair of actors, the director is going to get an ulcer. Mann got the best scene of his career. The strange part is how little actually happens. No punches, no gunfire, just coffee and conversation. And it runs tighter than the downtown shootout that tears up half of LA later on. Number 13. Pacino made up the great-ass line completely on the spot. Heat runs 3 hours and is stuffed with quotable lines, but the one that people actually yell back at the screen is 6 words that Pacino invented in the moment, because she's got a great ass. On the page, the scene was straight police work. Vincent Hanna is leaning on Alan Marciano, the small role handed to Hank Azaria, one of my favorite voice actors, truly a legend, who at the time was relatively unknown in a room full of heavyweights. He had an affair with Charlene Shiherlis, Ashley Judd's character, the wife of Val Kilmer's Chris. Hanna presses, Marciano squirms, information changes hands. It's tense and professional, nothing more. But Michael Mann shoots a scene 100 different ways, and somewhere deep in that pile of takes, Pacino apparently got bored enough to detonate. Just after the "Who, what are you, an owl" line, and I cleaned that up a little, he cranked Hannah from a controlled simmer to a full meltdown and unloaded the whole thing at point-blank range. Azaria had no warning. That stunned blink, the muttered Jesus, the face of a man rethinking every choice that put him 3 feet from a screaming Al Pacino. None of that is acting. Azaria has said flatly that Pacino genuinely terrified him, and Mann left the real reaction in, because you simply cannot fake that. Decades on, people still argue about the bank job, the diner, the ending. But nobody argues about that great ass. Number 12. Keanu walked off Heat for Hamlet. By now, Chris Shiherlis belongs to Val Kilmer, Macaulay's loyal right hand. But the part was never written for him. Michael Mann's first choice was Keanu Reeves. Reeves was offered the role fresh off Speed and right in the thick of becoming a genuine movie star. But he passed. He left a roughly $6 million payday on the table to go play Hamlet at the Manitoba Theatre Centre in Winnipeg for about $1,000 a week. In the dead of a Winnipeg winter, fans lined up around the block in early 1995 to watch the Speed guy work through The Prince of Denmark. Picture explaining that to your agent, turning down De Niro and Pacino and probably more importantly $6 million to spend your nights asking whether to be or not to be. That left Mann scrambling, and his answer was Val Kilmer, who came with one small complication of his own. He was busy being Batman. Kilmer walked straight off Batman Forever and folded Heat in right behind it, 2 films stacked back-to-back in the same year. Gotham 1 minute, then Mann's Criminal Los Angeles the next. Reeves got his crack at one of the most punishing roles in theater. Kilmer turned in one of the coolest supporting performances of the decade, and the movie ended up with the only Chris Shiherlis that anyone can picture now. Number 11. The cast did their homework with real crooks. Plenty of actors prep for a crime role with a stack of books and a couple of documentaries. Michael Mann skipped all of that and introduced his cast to actual criminals. De Niro, Val Kilmer, Tom Sizemore, all of Macaulay's crew got driven up to Folsom State Prison to sit across from real armed robbers doing long stretches. Then came dinners around Los Angeles with working thieves and ex-cons, where the actors watched how these guys carried themselves, scanned a room, and talked shop about scores the way other people discuss quarterly numbers. Their guide through all of it was Edward Bunker, a former career criminal who had done hard time before turning into an acclaimed novelist. Mann put Bunker's prison novel No Beast So Fierce in the cast's hands and hired him to keep the crew's tradecraft honest, then liked him enough to write him into the film. Jon Voight's fence, Nate, is built on Bunker. The cops got the mirror image. Pacino and the actors playing the robbery homicide unit were handed off to real LAPD detectives. Dinners with them and their wives, mock interrogations, hours of watching how a detective actually talks when there's no jury in the room. Mann even logged his own ride-alongs, collecting the small details that directors never think to chase. By the time cameras rolled, both sides of the law had spent more time with the genuine article than most actors spend with the script. Number 10. Pacino played Hannah on Secret Nose Candy. Vincent Hanna runs on a frequency that the rest of Heat can't quite match, and almost nobody watching caught the reason for 2 decades. Pacino built the whole performance around a secret. Hanna uses cocaine. His logic was simple. A robbery-homicide detective pulling endless hours on no sleep, chasing killers while his marriage falls apart, needs something to keep the engine lit. Pacino decided that a little recreational use was just what the doctor ordered, but he didn't want to play him as a strung-out addict. He landed on what he called chipping, using it just enough to explain the live-wire energy and the way Hannah lurches from dead quiet focus into full eruption inside a single sentence. That dial was a deliberate choice, not Pacino freelancing. Mann actually shot the proof, filming a scene of Hannah taking a hit before walking into a club and snorting a line off a dagger tucked in the small of his back. Then Mann killed it in the edit, deciding it was too heavy a message. The scenes went, and the performance stayed. The secret sat on the cutting room floor until 2016, when Pacino let it slip at an Academy screening moderated by Christopher Nolan, then spelled it out later on Marc Maron's podcast. Number 9. Even in prison, Kevin Gage couldn't escape Waingro. Waingro is the human wrecking ball who detonates every careful plan in Heat, a snitch, a loose cannon, the reason a clean armored car job turns into a bloodbath. The man who played him turned out to be a model prisoner. Kevin Gage built the character so convincingly that he made hardened bank robbers look like responsible adults, and then the role followed him out of the theater and into a federal cell. In 2003, Gage drew 41 months for cultivating marijuana. He had been growing it under a California medical license, with San Francisco officials broadly supportive at the time, right up until federal law walked in and prosecuted him anyway. Inside, almost nobody bothered with Kevin. Guards and inmates alike landed on the same name, Waingro, the most hated man in a movie full of criminals, now answering to it in a minimum security yard. The joke stopped at the nickname, though. The real Gage kept his head down and behaved his way into an early release, getting out after roughly 2 years of a 41-month sentence with no double crosses and none of the chaos his namesake left smoking behind him. Number 8. Heat sat on a shelf for 16 years. Most movies take a few years to get made. Heat took 16. Michael Mann wrote the first version of the script in 1979, a 180-page brick of a screenplay he was determined to get exactly right. The studios were less determined. They looked at all 180 pages and saw the same things every time: too long, too expensive. Rather than let it die, Mann shrank it. By the late 1980s, he was NBC's go-to crime guy off Miami Vice and Crime Story, so he pulled the Heat screenplay back out, cut it down, and reshaped it into a TV pilot. That became a 1989 TV movie called LA Takedown, Heat, with the budget of a long episode and none of the wattage. The skeleton is all there, though. Vincent Hanna already has his name and his obsession. The cop and thief mirror is already the entire point. The one giveaway is the thief, who in LA Takedown isn't Neil McCauley yet. He's Patrick McLaren. NBC passed on the series, and that's usually where a project quietly disappears. But then The Last of the Mohicans hit in 1992, a critical and commercial smash, and Mann walked away holding the one thing his script had never gotten him before: leverage. Warner Brothers handed him $60 million, the two biggest actors alive, and the room to build it his way. All of it 16 years after he first typed page 1. Number 7. Amy Brenneman didn't want to be in Heat. Heat is 3 hours of men, firepower, and brooding silence. Its beating heart came from the one person who looked at all of that and said no thanks. Amy Brenneman plays Edie, the graphic designer who slips past Neil McCauley's armor when an entire police department cannot. Mann found her on NYPD Blue and originally pictured her as Charlene, the role that went to Ashley Judd. She looked at the script, saw nothing but guys and guns, and wasn't interested. Then, instead of flattering a famous director the way you're supposed to, she told him to his face that she just didn't get the appeal. She was sick of men and guns, baffled that nobody in the whole movie could just sit down and talk it out. Mann did the opposite of showing her the door because she had just described a different character without even trying. Edie wanders through the entire film thinking, "Who are you people?" and Brenneman wasn't acting. She meant every word. He moved her to Edie and cast her on the spot. The actress who wanted nothing to do with a crime movie became its soul, and the part she almost never took became the one role nobody else could have touched. Number 6. The diner was a real restaurant and became a shrine. Mann shot almost none of Heat on a soundstage, 95 real locations across Los Angeles in 107 days. The place where Hannah and McCauley finally sit down is not a set. It was a genuine working Beverly Hills restaurant called Kate Mantilini. The movie became a classic, and the place leaned all the way in. A photo of De Niro and Pacino went up on the wall, the booth turned into a pilgrimage spot, and fans stopped asking for a good table and started asking for the exact booth where the two of them traded quiet threats over coffee. It helped that Kate Mantilini sat 2 blocks from the Academy, making it a second home for Oscar voters and industry regulars. The run ended in 2014 when a rent hike closed it for good after 27 years. The booths were cleared, the tables scattered, and the shrine packed up with everything else. For nearly 2 decades, a comfort food joint down the block from the Academy got to moonlight as a movie landmark, all because Mann wanted one real room for the conversation the whole film had been building toward. Number 5. The shootout's gunfire is completely real. Crank Heat up loud, and the downtown bank shootout doesn't just stick with you, it sticks with the neighbors. 30 years on, It still sounds unlike almost any other gunfight ever put on film, and that is no accident. Michael Mann flatly refused to fake it. Most movie gunfights get built after the fact. Actors fire blanks and sound engineers paint over them with pre-recorded shots from a library. Mann couldn't stand the result. Too tidy, too processed, too obviously a movie. So he kept the real thing. Out on the streets of downtown LA, his team ringed the location with microphones and recorded the guns as they actually fired. Full blanks going off inside a canyon of glass, steel, and concrete. The mics caught the part no Foley artist could fake. The crack, the echo, that metallic ring slapping off the towers and rolling down the avenues. Most directors want a cool shootout. Mann wanted you flinching like you were standing on the corner when the first rifle went off. Number 4. A 2-second reload that outlived heat. Most people walked away from the bank shootout remembering the spectacle. Firearms instructors remember something that is over in a couple of seconds: the magazine change. Chris Shaherlis is pinning down a wall of cops when his rifle clicks empty. In one unbroken motion, Kilmer dumps the spent mag, pulls a fresh one off his vest, slaps it home, hits the bolt release, and is firing again, and his eyes never once dropped to the gun. That fluency came from months of training under former British SAS soldiers Andy McNabb and Mick Gould. Reloads and movement drilled over and over until the rifle became an extension of Kilmer. The whole point was to get the actors past performing the motion and into simply doing it, eyes up the way someone who had run it 1,000 times would never need to look. It worked well enough to grow its own military folklore, with a version everyone repeats involving a drill instructor showing the clip to recruits and barking that anyone who can't reload that fast should just go home. A scene only gets mistaken for a training film when it's genuinely good enough that most people can't tell the difference. Number 3. Goldenthal got cut from Goldenthal's own ending. Heat ends on the saddest piece of music in the whole film, and the man paid to score the movie didn't write a single note of it. Neil McCauley bleeds out on the LAX tarmac, Vincent Hanna takes his hand, and Moby's God moving over the face of the waters does the rest. The hushed piano, the slow rising synth, 3 hours of gunfire dissolving into 2 lonely men who finally understand each other. It is the sound most people carry out of the theater. But it was never the plan. Mann had hired acclaimed composer Elliot Goldenthal, who wrote a cue for that exact goodbye called Hand in Hand, built note by note for the moment Hannah reaches down for a dying man under the airport lights. A perfectly good cue. Then Mann heard the Moby track somewhere in post and quietly pulled his own composer off the most important scene in the film. Goldenthal didn't let it rot, though. He stripped out the electric guitars, dropped the bagpipes, and handed the whole thing to a 1996 drama called Michael Collins, where it closed out the end titles of a completely different film. Number 2. A famous Heat shot came from a painting. For one of Heat's most haunting moments, Michael Mann pulled his reference off a gallery wall. In the scene where Macaulay comes home alone, he sets his keys and his gun on a bare table, crosses an empty beach house, and stops at a wall of glass to stare out at a black, restless Pacific. No dialogue, barely a movement, just a disciplined man and a horizon he will never actually reach. That frame is lifted almost whole from Pacific, a 1967 painting by Canadian magic realist Alex Colville. Colville's canvas holds the same pieces in nearly the same arrangement: a handgun resting heavy in the foreground, a man with his back to us at an open door, the flat gray sea beyond. Swap the doorway for a Malibu glass wall, and you have essentially got the shot. Mann has said on the commentary that the painting was his reference, and that what captured him was a profound sense of sustained alienation and loneliness, which is Macaulay in a single image. Most crime movies get remembered for what explodes. Heat gets remembered for a man standing still at a window, borrowed from a painter who understood loneliness long before man ever pointed a camera at the sea. And number 1. The real Macaulay died almost frame for frame. Mann borrowed more than Neil Macaulay's name. He borrowed the man's death. On March 25, 1964, in the pouring rain, the real Neil Macaulay tailed an armored cash delivery to a National Tea grocery store at 4720 South Cicero Avenue on Chicago's southwest side. He brought 3 men with him, But what he didn't bring was any idea that Chuck Adamson and a team of detectives had been watching the crew for weeks and were already in position, alleys blocked, waiting for them to walk back out with the money. They did, and the lot erupted. Macaulay broke from the others and bolted down a narrow residential gangway, a strip of concrete only a few feet wide, not far off the dimensions of the cells he had spent half his life in, with Adamson just a step behind. Macaulay spun and pulled the trigger, and his gun picked that exact second to misfire. Adamson put 6 rounds into him. What hooked Mann was never the gunfire. It was that Adamson, the man who had just killed Macaulay, didn't hate him. He admired him. The two had sat across a table from each other once and talked, a detective and a thief who saw in each other the same total devotion to their work, pointed in opposite directions. That mutual respect, not good versus evil, became the thing Mann built the whole film around. It is why the airport goodbye still lands 30 years later. Hannah shoots the man he chased across LA, then takes his hand as the life goes out of him. The real bullets are history, but the bond underneath them genuinely ran between a cop and the man he hunted all the way to the end.